So we've talked about credit, getting credit, the bad side of credit, the good side of credit, buying a car, and now the other big purchase that we have in our life is probably buying a house. And so looking at what our decision factors should be, of course, looking at our finances can all play a big part of that. So let's jump into buying a house. Um, your choice of housing, that's kind of important. Sometimes we choose where we want to live by based on neighborhoods, proximity to work, school districts, amenities. If you choose a condo or something like that, you may choose it because of amenities that it has. There may be neighborhood associations, so all those things we're going to look at. But we sort of base it on how we're going to spend our time, where our time matters. So does our time matter commuting to work? Does our time matter having a park close by? Do we want to be on a bike trail? Those kind of things can all make a big difference. It's all personal. There's no one size fits all. I can't tell you the best house to buy is X. I can just tell you the best house to buy is the one that works for you. And so, that's kind of an ambiguous answer there. But we need to know what our B word budget is. And then we're going to have to turn in, that's when we fill out those financial things we learned in the early chapters. You're going to need an assets minus liabilities equals your net worth. You're going to have a net worth statement. We're going to have a net assets and liabilities, statement. You're going to have all these things to fill out for getting a home loan. They're going to need to know all that. So that's the reason we cover all that, because when you get loans is definitely when you need that. You need to also figure out what stage of life you're in, how much money you have to spend. Your first home may not be a 7-bedroom on a lake with a pool. It may be a starter home in a neighborhood full of starter homes. So just kind of we look at those things. If you're young and single, sometimes you prefer to rent. You may prefer to rent an apartment or a house or a condominium. Of course, purchasing gives you tax advantages and ownership. So that some people that are young jump right into house owning just because of the tax advantages and the fact that your rent is buying you an asset. If you're a young couple with children, almost anybody that I know that's had children, when they get pregnant or start to have their first child, they start really wanting what they call a nesting issue, which means they want to get a home. They want something stable. They don't want to rent. They don't want an apartment with, college kids and a pool. They now want a neighborhood with kids and bikes. So those things do really play into that. If you're a couple with young children, you may look at renting still. It may be more advantageous cost wise. And it may get you in the area that you want, especially if there's a school district involved or something like that, because sometimes a home is not available in that area. So if you rent, then you'd get that option too. Plus, you don't have the commitment of having to repair everything on your budget. You get to call a manager or the property manager to fix things that are broken, like a fence, appliances, etc. A single parent rental housing can provide a lot of stability too. It can provide home security if you rent a home. It can help with bills because again, you're not responsible for having to have somebody fix things. And then if not, you may want to purchase a home and purchase something that's low maintenance. So you may want to buy a new home, not an older fixer upper, unless you're very handy. I was not very handy. I always thought I would buy because I loved all the shows on HGTV that, refab a home and, make it livable. And of course, Fayetteville has a lot of historic homes in the historic district, but they were kind of expensive to buy and then they were very expensive to renovate. And I'm not handy at all. So I decided pretty early on that was not an option for me because that didn't fit my lifestyle. So I couldn't saw wood on the weekend or, that kind of thing. So it was not for me. Of course, if you're couple with children no longer at home, some older couples will decide to move to a rental house or a lake house or downsize or those kind of things you hear. But they also may keep their house that they have and keep the access for their kids to come home, grandkids to come home, that kind of thing. So it can make a big difference. And then a hired person, you see that a lot. You may be seeing it with your parents or grandparents stage. They really do downsize. Some will move into a retirement village. Some will move to a smaller maintenance house. Some will move to a new house. I've had some retired friends that get out of their old house and move to a brand new house just because it's kind of like buying a new car. You don't have things that you have to fix right off the bat. Um, and they've usually by that point have built up a lot of equity, so it makes those kind of transitions a little cheaper. Renting sometimes is a really big option for them, again, because you can call a maintenance person. My grandma, who lived in Little Rock, was in a big old historic home um, until she was about 82 to 84. They were rebuying those homes. She got a pretty decent offer on her home to be refurbished, and so she decided she wanted to sell it. She was single, a widow, and my dad and his sisters moved her into an apartment actually just about a block away. So she kept her neighborhood and her neighbors, but she had apartment living. She was really put out with them for thinking that was a good idea until the first thing broke, and she didn't have to find a maintenance man. She just called. They came up and they fixed it. She thought, this is the best thing ever. She lived to be 95, and we think that made a big difference because when you don't have that responsibility, it can make a big difference. So renting may be an option at that stage also. When you buy a home, of course, you're building equity. You're hoping it appreciates in values, which 95% of the time they do. Um, so it's a good investment. Now there can be opportunity costs that you have to look at. Interest earnings are lost on the money that you have to use for down payment. So if you've taken money from savings, it's no longer drawing in savings. So you have to look at if you had to pay 30,000 down, you no longer have that $30,000 sitting in a stock market or a CD or in savings account. And then of course you have to consider the time and cost of commuting to work. Um, and that's why when you look, we'll discuss later on as we get through all this. Sometimes you choose a home based on work proximity. That's very important. Sometimes you choose where to live based on, like I said, schools or based on your leisure time. So it just depends on where you want to be. Um, and of course, renters don't have the tax advantages or the equity growth. So that can be a negative on that respect. And then, of course, time and money that you spend to repair and improve a lower priced home can also be an opportunity cost of owning a home. So you have to think of all those things when you're looking at buying a house. Time and effort that you have your home built to personal specifications. I discovered I was very picky when I went to look for my first home, and my budget was constrained because I don't make a lot of money and I was single. So I had a smaller budget and I just really did not like what was out there. And then I discovered I could build what I liked for about that same price. And that was very attractive to me. But then in building, of course, it spent a lot of time. There were a lot of dropping things at work to run out to meet the floor guy or the paint guy or the whatever, because I had a contractor, but they needed your approval. So there was some opportunity cost with doing that too. Um, how to find a house? Where do you look? Well, um, in this textbooks they mention online sources and apps. You can look at renting, buying, financing, remodeling. Friends are really good points of reference if you have real estate agent friends. There's government agencies that'll help you get a loan, a VA loan, etc. that can help. Of course, AI can help. They've got Zillow now. And probably the others that you can just say, I want a 3-bedroom home, in the root school district of Fayetteville, Arkansas, and see what pops up. And then you can say, I want one with an open floor plan, and it narrows that down. So you don't even have to keep looking through all the solutions. Back in the day, there was this huge real estate book that was printed every 2 weeks, I think. And if you were looking for a home, you got with your real estate agent, they brought you that book and you would go through it page by page by page trying to find. They usually listed new listings and tagged them in a separate section so you could see what was new. But, they had it according to price so you knew where to start the book if you were looking for low end, etc. It was a lot of painstaking time. And there was a picture and then those descriptions that you see like online that, say 2-bedroom, 3-bath, how many square feet, etc. And so with having this Zillow that can search, you can search online. With having the AI portion of it, you can really kind of narrow down what you're looking for so that when you call for either for sale by owner or call a real estate agent, you've got a lot of that looking out of your system. you know more what you want. You know you don't like this color plan. You know you don't like this floor plan. Those kind of things. So that can really help you sometimes with that. Renting advantages. If you want to rent, what do we need to look for? Well, consider location. Again, your location is your choice, whether it's work, travel, airport. You want to be close to an airport because you travel all the time. You want to be 5,000 miles from an airport because you travel all the time. You want to be in the woods. You want to be on the lake. You want to have a pool. You want to have, that. Know those things. Figure out what you want. And then look at the building exterior. Is it kept up? Do they keep it neat? Is it well maintained? Look at the interior. Have they been redone if it's an older building? Is the interior up to your satisfaction? And layout, of course, and then facilities that it offers. I mentioned if you want a gym on site, if you want a coffee bar on site, if you want, all these things can make a big difference. A room for entertaining. If you need more room than an apartment offers, consider renting a house or a condo. Of course, they're more expensive because the more space you have, the more expensive it is. That's just the way it is. And in some of those, in renting a house or a condo, you may be responsible for some of the maintenance. Typically, now you may not as much in a condo. It depends on how they're set up. If they're set up with yards, you may be responsible for mowing the yard. They may have somebody mow the front, you mow the back. There's certain things that may be helpful, but there may be some things you have to take on yourself. And renting a house, a few times I rented a house in my life, I was responsible for the yard. They took care of home maintenance, but I was responsible for the things outside. So, you got to factor that in too when you're looking at that. If you decide to move to a new city or you have your new job and you're trying to figure out what to do, probably my best advice, and the book concurs with this too, would be unless you know the city and it's a city you've been to and you understand everything about the city, it's a place you've either lived before, vacationed before, or something that you have a real understanding, I would suggest renting first and figure out traffic patterns, figure out, commute times, figure out, neighborhoods, figure out school districts. Some of those things you can find out before you move. You can ask those questions, but there's nothing like living in the town to get a better grasp on how that is. When I worked in Little Rock for a period of time for the bank down there, I was just there for a short while, so I was renting, and so I rented in West Little Rock because I knew that was the new up-and-coming yuppie place to be. And so that's where I rented, and it was great. I loved it. Everything that I wanted was out there, except commute time was the big thing. And it was this hilarious thing. If I left at 7:25, I got to work by 8 o'clock, no problem. If I left at 7:26 to 7:27, I got to work about 8:30. So those things can make a difference. Luckily, the bank was very flexible with when you arrived time, knowing that traffic was the big issue. But everyone commuted from west into downtown. So look at those things when you're looking at that. We have that issue in Northwest Arkansas, everybody commuting north to work at, Walmart, J.B. Hunt, etc. from Fayetteville. So you have, and further south, but you have a lot of traffic heading north in the morning and a lot of traffic heading south in the evening. So you might want to look at the other end of that if you don't want to spend your time commuting. Check ads, online newspaper ads, join a Facebook group. There may be a Facebook group for that town. Kind of keep up with it before you get there. Of course, look at real estate, rental offices. And then if you know people there, ask about that too. When you rent, of course, in this class we have formulas for everything, but there is a price to rent ratio. And basically it's looking at the relationship between the home prices and annual rents. And it indicates the desirability of owning over renting. Right now, that ratio has shifted, and there's advantages of renting over owning. And we're seeing a huge trend. Number one, there's not enough what they call affordable housing out there. The average home price currently is, hold on, I have it right here, is $2,100 a month. And that's just your starter home kind of thing. And that's kind of expensive. So looking at that, a lot of people have decided to rent instead of own a home. Plus they like the amenities. Plus they like the fact they don't have to call anybody. So there's been a shift from, ooh, you got to get out and get your home and own it, to, ooh, you got to get out. Maybe you want to rent. So, keep that in mind that renting has had a bad auspice. People will tell you, oh, you must own your own home or you're not going to get any tax deductions, which is a true statement. But you have to think about what the cost is to you and to your budget. So renting may be the way to go for you for a while. It's like I said, we've seen a shift of young people getting out. We've seen a shift of home buyers. I think the average age of new home buyers now is like 38, which used to be 25. So you can see there's been a big jump there. So it's just something to keep in mind that it may be the best way to go. Price to rent ratio, here's how you can calculate it. It's divided the median home price where you are to the median annual rent for a given area. For example, a city's median home price of $400,000 and median annual rent is $20,000 means your rent to price ratio should be 400,000 divided by 20,000 would equal 20. The lower the ratio, it's generally more favorable to buy. The higher the ratio, it's generally more favorable to rent. So like in that example, it was right at 20, which is they said 20 and above. That's a higher ratio. If that ratio, if it, the median price of a home was 200,000 and the median annual rent was 20,000, again, you can see that would make a big difference. That would make that number a lot lower, so it'd be more advantageous to buy. So you can look at that if you want, to give you another way to do it. In Fayetteville, the average median home price is 434,000. The average rental price is $1,800 a month or 21,600 per year. So Fayetteville's average would be 20.09, again, bordering on that higher ratio. So it may be more advantageous to rent in Fayetteville than it is to own. So again, just kind of gives you something else. If you're a finance money nerd like I can be, you want to look at all these things and kind of put it on paper and go, okay, that's higher, that's higher, that's good. Kind of helps you make your decision sometimes. There are, of course, advantages to renting. You get to select your area. You search. What are the stages of this? You search first, then before you sign your lease, check the date, the cost, anything you're responsible for. Is there a deposit before? How do you get your deposit back? Is there a pet deposit? Are pets allowed? Then living in the rental property, of course, keep it in good condition as best you can. Respect the rights of others regarding noise. And then at the end of the lease, clean up the apartment. If you need to have it taken care of, you want to leave it as you saw it when you moved in. So you do your best to leave it that way. And then hopefully you get your deposit returned. Advantages of renting we sort of discussed and talked about. You don't have to be concerned with maintenance and repairs. You have fewer concerns with property taxes, property insurance, and upkeep. Now, I would tell you if you're renting to get renter's insurance. So you would still have property insurance, but it's just for your property that's in your apartment. Or condo or whatever you're renting. Just because when we get into the insurance section, we'll discuss this, but renter's insurance is usually relatively inexpensive and it does provide you loss of, if things are stolen, if you're broken into, if there's a fire, etc. Your landlord covers the building and all that kind of stuff, so you don't have to worry about that, which is why it ends up being a little cheaper. So I would consider doing that. Also, to get in an apartment is typically a lot cheaper than getting in a house. Again, if you were buying a $434,000 house and you have to have 10% down, you have to have $43,000 to walk in that door. Some require 15% down. That increases that. So some prefer 20% down. So you can see that would double that. So getting into an apartment, typically it's first and last month's rent. So if you're looking at $1,200 a month, you're looking at $2,400. That's a heck of a lot cheaper to walk in the door. So that's the reason renting is becoming a little more advantageous too. Of course, many rental properties may have a pool. They may have common maintenance for outside if you're like in a condo. They may have social activities for the residents. They may have a mahjong club. But you have these things that may do that. And it may just give you like the community of it. They may have a bike trail. They may have access to a bike trail. They may have they usually have a room, like a rec room or whatever. They may have a big seating area with a huge screen TV. A lot of them have gone to that, so that if there's a big game on, you can go down there and watch with your buddies. They may have a coffee restaurant there, a little bar kind of restaurant thing, so that you can grab snacks or food and take care of that. So there's a lot of amenities that are being offered now for rentals. And of course, the big one is a lot of times there's a pool, so that's kind of nice too. Disadvantages. While we've painted this glowing picture of renting, there are some things that you have to consider on the negative side. Number one, you don't have mortgage interest that you're going to deduct. If you don't deduct on income tax, you're fine with that. And property taxes, you get to deduct also. If you don't deduct, you don't have that either. And then, of course, beware of any lease to purchase or rent to purchase or rent with options to become a homeowner. Sometimes those are really good, but a lot of times you're paying way more on the front end than you are to actually purchase the home if you just go buy a home. So just keep in mind that sounds appealing, but just check the fine print and make sure it really works for you. Of course, it may have a negative thing with an apartment or a condo or whatever. There may have restrictions regarding remodeling or restrictions regarding pets, restrictions regarding sound. My parents moved to a condo that they bought, but they have a neighborhood association, and there were a lot of restrictions on what they could put outside. Now, in their backyard, they could do anything they wanted, what they could put out front. So it was real hard for them to make their place look welcoming without getting written up. So those things can make a big difference. You want to check that and read the bylaws if they have them, et cetera, to see what you're up against. And then, of course, you want to be sure your lease covers your behind, and also because it's going to protect the lease or the and you're the leasee, so it's gonna protect the person that's leasing it to you, but you want to be sure it also offers you some protection. So just be sure you read it well and take care of that. The legal details of a lease should include the name and address of the property, the name and address of the landlord, the name of you, which is the lessee. The lessor, as I said, is the landlord. The effective date and the length of the lease. Is it automatically renewable? Do you have to renew it? Those kind of things. Or after a year, do you just go to a month by month? After 2 years, you just go to month by month. So just knowing those things can help. What the effective date, the length of the lease is, what your security deposit is, what the pet deposit is if they allow pets. Is there a size on pets, an amount on pets? What the due date is for rent will be spelled out in that. Where rent has to be paid will be spelled out in that. If there's late rent payments and a charge, that'll be spelled out. If you are responsible for utilities and or appliances, that'll be spelled out also. Some utilities are covered. Sometimes all utilities are covered, so you want to know that. Restrictions on activities, again, pets or remodeling. And then, of course, if you have damages or something should happen or move out early or later, are there penalties? Can you sublet? Could your job changes and you get transferred? What happens? There's sometimes things that are beyond our control. Are there exceptions for that? And if you're afraid of that, maybe ask that to be written in your lease too. I'm working with a company that's multi-state or global or something, and there's a chance I could be shipped out. Can I get out of my lease early based on that respect? And then conditions on when the landlord can enter your unit. A couple of times that I rented, they would use my apartment for a show apartment. To show people around, because I always made my bed every morning, and I was, picked up the house before I left, and that kind of thing. So they knew it was always in a decent condition. I didn't know that until about 6 or 8 months into my lease, and the maintenance guy told me, "Oh, they always use your apartment to do that." And of course, when I mentioned that to one of the guys at work, they were like, "Legally, they can't do that." Have they told you that they're doing that? So just know that they have to tell you how often they can enter your apartment, when they can enter. Usually, there's a clause in there for bug control to enter on certain days, those kind of things. But them just walking in, there usually is a limit on how many times they can just walk in. So beware of that. Security deposit is usually required. The landlord's supposed to hold that and then return it at the end of your lease. They usually use it, but then they still owe it to you at the end of the lease. But anyway, that's what the security deposit is for. For many apartments, water is included, but it may not include Wi-Fi. Some include Wi-Fi and water. Some include electricity. Some don't include electricity. So just be sure of that. And then be sure if there's any junk fees listed on there. And they won't call them junk fees. they might, but they very rarely do that. But they may say they're going to have a fee for a credit check. They're going to have a fee for the application. They're going to have a resident portal fee for maintenance. They're going to have a lease modification fee, like you asked if you could be transferred. Could you get out of your lease? They may add a fee for that. Online fees for bill paying, online fees for minimal wear and tear. So just, just kind of read it and make sure those things are covered. Okay, buying your home. You decided leasing's not what you want to do, or you've leased and now you're ready to buy a home. What do we have to look for with that? So when you start the home buying process, Figure out what the benefits are to you. Pride of ownership is one of them. Having something that's yours and you own it really does help, especially if you've rented for a long time because you spend so much time worrying about, I put a hole in the wall, how do I fix that, kind of thing. Not like punch a hole, but I mean like hung a picture hole. Um, so, that really helps that you can just hang it and not have to worry about it. There are financial benefits, of course. You get some tax breaks, you get some tax credits, that kind of thing. And you're building equity. You're owning an asset and you're building equity, so that's a plus too. And it can help with your expressing your individuality in decorating because you do have free reign to put nails in the wall, paint it a certain color if you want. I'm the queen of white, off white for walls, so that's not ever been a big deal for me. But I've had friends that's been their biggest thrill of getting a home is being able to paint the walls red or blue or taupe or whatever. So that can make a big difference for a lot of people to be able to control how it looks. There is a home buying process again cycle that we look at. This little roundabout thing comes up all the time. But of course, determine what your needs are. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to be located? Do you need 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1 bath, sunken tub, big shower, no bath? I mean, that kind of thing. Well, I mean, you want a bathroom, but no tub. I mean, I hope you want a bathroom. I'm sorry, that's throwing that out there for everybody. Um, then find your property and evaluate your property that you want to purchase. Again, knowing how much you can spend can help you kind of back into that. Knowing where you want to be located can help you. And then, of course, determining what the appropriate market price is. Zillow has that option to when you're looking on it. Like I said, the other apps probably do too. I'm not just marketing for Zillow here. I'm just saying I've looked at that one the most. And I know that they'll put other homes in the area have sold for XYZ. And so that lets you know if that house seems overpriced, if that house seems underpriced. Usually there's a price per square foot. Used to be the run of the mill was if it's $100 a square foot, you were good. I think now that's about 212 to 213 in the Fayetteville area per square foot. So knowing what the good price per square foot is, you can just do quick math. If it's 1,000 square feet, you're paying $200,000. So that helps you kind of go from there to figure out if this is a good buy. A lot of times houses hit the market, they're a little overpriced because they want to bargain. Sometimes houses hit the market and they don't want to bargain at all. That's what they want. So you have to kind of wade through and know that also. Of course, obtaining financing is going to be your next big key. You'll need to talk to banks, look at mortgage houses, etc., to look at what you can get for a financing. Sometimes it's recommended if you have a question about your income, do that first, and then go from there, and then look at what you qualify for, and then choose how you want to buy your house. So you can do that also. And then after you do all that process, find your house, etc., then the mortgage companies will arrange a closing date. You'll have all the documents that you sign. I can tell you I had an absolute panic attack when I had to sign that I was responsible for this for 30 years. And I just thought, 30 years, that's forever. And it really did throw me. I mean, I still signed, but I had a couple of sleepless, panicky nights. But then it settles in and you think, okay, I'm in it for, I knew this, that's fine. So anyway, but then you sign all the paperwork, pay all your fees, they hand you the keys, and you're ready to move in. Drawbacks of owning a home is, of course, getting the money for a down payment. As we've talked about, if you're looking at a $400,000 home, which is the average price in Fayetteville, you have to have $40,000 minimum to put down. Qualifying for mortgage financing. If you don't have a good credit rating or you haven't had a lot of credit, it may be hard to qualify out of the gate for that. So you got to keep that in mind. Property values are changing right now. They're very strong. Sometimes they'll take a dip. So just knowing that you're buying in a good neighborhood that probably won't have that fluctuation helps. If it's a startup neighborhood or in a neighborhood that's in a questionable part of town, it may fluctuate. That may make a difference in looking at it. It may be difficult to sell your home quickly. We had a point in time a few years ago that houses were selling in under 30 days. They were selling sometimes the day you listed it. So that was a real easy time to list your property. Right now, I think the last I heard, property was taking 30 to 45 days minimum-ish to sell. So, if you're in a big hurry to sell, that can be a big drawback. And of course, there's higher costs of owning your own home. I make it sound really, really enticing, don't I? But there's, you have to have home improvements. Things may break. Plumbing may go bad. I mean, there's things that come along that you have to pay. And of course, you have to pay real estate taxes. And those go up all the time too. Like everything else, they go, oh, your house is worth more. Let's charge you more real estate tax. But that is due every year. And if you don't pay that, you don't want to talk about that outcome because it's not good because essentially they can buy your house for the taxes that it owes. And that's makes no sense to me. And I disagree with that, but that's a whole nother soapbox to get on. But anyway, so you have to budget that you're going to pay taxes on that each year. So then we have to look at the type of housing that's available. We think of the single family home, which is the, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, attached garage kind of thing in a neighborhood with a yard, front, back, side. There are also duplexes and townhouses. You can buy a duplex, you can buy a townhouse. That may be something that's interesting to you. As I said, my parents bought a condominium that falls into that process. They had moved from a big house and a fairly decent sized yard in their late 70s, early 80s to a condominium that really helped them because they had with the homeowners association, they took care of the front yard. They could make the back however they wanted it. It was a smaller footprint house. It still had 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, so they still had a lot of flexibility and functionality in it. It was all one level, which they liked too. But anyway, so that worked out really well for them. So, look at something, they just shared one wall. They didn't share two walls like you might in a duplex or a townhome. They just shared one wall with their neighbor. So there was a really quiet thing to do. So just saying that there are other options out there besides your typical house when you start looking to buy that might work for you. Then there's cooperative housing. This is something I don't know a whole lot about. I will be honest about. The units are owned by a nonprofit, and members share and rent the unit building with multiple units. So it would be kind of like an apartment, I think, setup. But it's you're renting your area, but you're actually owning the whole unit is owned, but then you're owning your share and your portion of it. So of course, when you're looking at buying something, you want to know how it's constructed. You may not care as much if you rent, but there's factory built houses, so they give that's kind of a nice price break too. They're built somewhere else and then they're moved out to the housing sites, like prefab home. They used to think of those only as like double wide trailers kind of thing. They've come a long way with that. That's no longer the case, but that still could fall in that category. But there's components like that. There's neighborhoods that are set up that way, and so because there's a mass production, factory conditions, it keeps the cost lower. Usually, you're paying for the lot plus whatever that reduced cost is for the house. So that might be something. Mobile homes is kind of that. We just talked about that type of manufactured home. Usually, they're smaller than 1,000 square feet. They may have some that are 1,000 square feet. Um, Safety is debated because typically, especially in our area of Tornado Alley, when you hear of a tornado hitting, it hits a mobile home park because it has to be flat and level, etc. Some people will buy land and then move a mobile home on it. That gives you a little better control of that because you're not surrounded by a bunch of other, flat level places. But they do have a lot of features. I can remember some friends that bought that's what their first foray into home buying was a mobile home on a piece of land, and then they built a home on that same piece of land. So that was just their way to get a house out there quicker and cheaper. But it had, they had sunken tubs, they had walk-in showers, they had some nice amenities. It was just a cheaper made house, which means that it's probably going to depreciate quicker and depreciate faster. So instead of appreciating like a house built does, a home, they depreciate. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you're going to build a home, make sure you have a good contractor. Do they have experience? Um, do they have a good working relationship with other architects, suppliers, electricians, etc.? I was lucky enough to get a good contractor that did my house. He was phenomenal. My parents were lucky enough when they built their house, they got a great contractor. But we kind of asked around and relied on some people recommending a contractor. If you have to start yellow pagesing it, I would put the word out, ask friends, start asking around, ask at work, those kind of things, just to make sure, because that can make a big difference. Um, you know, when these people are having to coordinate and work and do those things for you. Now you may want to contract it yourself. If you have the time and can make the decisions on calling an electrician, calling a plumber, setting up this, setting up that in the right times, that's great. That's not my forte, nor did I know anybody in all those avenues of life. So it was up to me. I had to hire a contractor. But if you want to make sure they've got a good relationship with those people, because otherwise you can either get shoddy work or delayed work or whatever, because if they don't like the guy or girl, they're not going to work to help them. So that you want to be sure of that. You want to be sure of some kind of quality assurance. If you're going to build a home, build your own, because you want to be sure, especially if you're contracting it out, you're relying on somebody else. Is there some kind of assurance? Do they offer an assurance that it's well built, that the joists used were quality standard, that they used all the current specifications, they didn't cut a corner here, etc. Those kind of things can be very important. If you're doing it yourself in contracting, you can make sure of that. But if you've third-partied that out, you want to be sure that's covered. What about payments during construction? A lot of times, you can get the contractor will take care of making all the payments, and then when you close on the house, that pays them off. But sometimes, you need to go ahead and get what they call a working loan at the bank, because the contractors need to be paid throughout. And so, you'll get a bill for the appliances. Well, that has to be paid. And basically what they're doing is they're setting up your house mortgage, but then they're making it like a draw account that we talked about in the last chapter, where you can just take out money as you need it. And so that's what you're doing. And then they'll roll that balance into your mortgage loan at the end of the time. So, depending on how you finance it, how do they need payments, and how are you going to cover that? And then what delays are considered normal and legitimate? Weather here is a very legitimate delay, and like during the monsoon season we had earlier this year, there were a lot of things delayed and people were getting very frustrated, and then of course if they don't have the roof on, or the concrete was just poured that day, and then the temperature drops, did it set properly? So all those things can make a difference in how things are done. So you want to be sure you know what those are. Is your contractor licensed and insured? Are they willing to provide names and addresses of other customers so you can call them and ask? And, check references. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And then check your, BB, Better Business Bureau. Check your Reddit posts. Google the name. See what comes up. We have some options out there, and see, are there a lot of complaints? And, of course, keep in mind that most people that leave reviews are going to be complainers. So see if there's just a few complaints, see if there's a consistent complaint. And then when you ask around or call other customers, were they very satisfied? And these 4 reviews you saw were just the 4 people that were ticked off, because that can happen too. Do they write a contract that provides a time schedule, cost estimate, and payment schedule? That would be nice. So that might be something to push for, and have that included. Of course, our bottom line is we're in this finance class together, and our bottom line is, how much can I afford? And that sometimes is the biggest realization of life that hits us. It's like, I want a $500,000 house. I can only afford a $200,000 house. So there's a lot of concessions to be made between those two price values. But figure out how much you can have for a down payment, how much income you're making and can afford for a house payment, and look at your current living expenses. Know if your current living expenses are stretching and strapping your budget. Increasing the house size can make a big difference. We had some friends that just upsized dramatically. And I that's my thing, is I always think, oh, they're going to freak when they get that first electric bill, because, you go from a 1,200 square foot house or 1,500 square foot house to a 7,000 square foot house. Everything's going to be more expensive. I mean, your insurance is more expensive, your payments are more expensive, your light bill is more expensive. I mean, everything is more expensive. So those things you have to kind of keep in mind, and just and keep up with. Can I afford what I have now, plus I can afford a larger space, or can I just barely afford what I have now? I can't go larger. Consider mortgage rates. Kind of look at them. If they're fluctuating quite a bit, try to, spitball when you can get the best. If they drop and you've been looking at a house, maybe jump on it to get that lower rate. Of course, you can always refinance. If a mortgage rate drops about 1 to 2 points, my rule of thumb was always 2 points, but the new rule of thumb is about 1%. You can refinance. Now you do have to pay for costs for refinancing. They're not as much as when you first close. But anyway, then you can lock it in for that lower rate. So it can make a big difference in your monthly payments that are required because interest is less. And of course, remember that you can also, when you have your mortgage payments, which is what we've always done, you can have them pay your taxes. They set up an escrow account and they can pay your insurance. So they take what it's going to cost you for 12 months, divide it by 12, add that to your mortgage payment. So your mortgage payment is actually a little higher, but you don't have to worry about having the cash available to make your to make your tax payments and your insurance payments whenever those come due. Now, some people prefer to pay those out of pocket themselves, so they don't do that with the mortgage. That's great too. However, it works best for your budget is the best way to do that. Pre-qualification really does help in this instance. We talk about it with in the last chapter with looking at automobiles and being able to walk in with it. It really helps with this purchase of a home. Number one, not only do you know what you can afford to buy or what they're saying you can afford to buy, but it gives you that step in the door when you say, "Well, I've been pre-qualified for 350 and this house is 285. Let's go." That kind of thing. So it helps you with that too. And then don't overextend yourself. That can be the biggest thing that happens is you think, well, I can afford that. And we had a big housing bubble crash a few years ago, and there were some deceptive practices going on, first of all. But a lot of people were told, they just looked at what they qualified for without looking at any other expenses. They just took their income, divided it by, 12, and then took that 20% that you're supposed to have for your rent expenses that we talked about a couple of chapters ago and gave them that as their house payment. And that wasn't really smart because people were buying houses they really could not afford. They weren't looking at the amenities, the utilities, the taxes, all those things. They had and the increased prices for utilities, etc. So they weren't looking at the whole picture. They're going, "Oh, great! I can afford a $400,000 home," and they would get in there, and within a year, they realized they could not afford it. So just be sure you make sure you look at all those things. We're smarter than that. We're looking at this from a professional level. Only purchase what you can afford. Sounds like your parents, because getting into what you can afford is going to help you in the long run. Plus, it gives you a great way to build equity. It doesn't strap you. You don't lay awake at night worrying about making your payments, etc. And then you can use what they call a starter home to get you in the door. Then after you've paid on it for a few years, you've built some equity, house values have increased, you can sell that house and move to something that's more desirable, more what you really wanted the first time you looked. And so that can make a big difference. So selecting a location, you've got to be aware of zoning laws. Of course, zoning laws can change, but if you have fields behind you and you think, "Oh gosh, isn't this wonderful? There's nothing behind me." Make sure why there's nothing behind you. Is it, a swamp? Is it a floodplain? Probably nothing will go in. Is it a industrial site? Is it a dumping ground? Is it, rural? I mean, those kind of things can make a big difference. Now, I can tell you that zoning laws will change. Some people bought some property that the big selling point was it backed up to farmland. Well, after 5 years, that farmer got out of the business, sold it, it was re-subdivided, and now they're in the middle of 1,000 houses. So, so just know that things can change, but you just want to make sure you're happy with it. But know about zoning and restrictions and laws and etc. You also want to make sure you've never been on a floodplain, and there are questions to ask about that because sometimes our floodplain maps change. And if you were in a floodplain once and now you're not, why are you not now? Did they make concessions to it? Did they redirect the water? Could it still flood? Those kind of things. Because then your insurance you need to cover to buy flood insurance, which we'll get into that in a few chapters. But if you have children, school system will make a big difference on where you look for a house because you want to have the right schools for your kids. Using a real estate agent can help you find homes based on your needs. If you have a long list of whatever, it can present the offer for you. They can help you through the bid and offer process, the going back and forth. They can assist you in getting financing. They can also help represent you at closing. So there are perks for having a real estate agent to get you through that process. Now, some of you won't need a real estate agent because you can do it yourself, and that's great. But I had a real estate agent for all of my house transactions because, I understand it and I know this stuff, but I don't want to take the time to verify all that. That's their job. So that's what When you get ready to buy, there will be a home inspection that's done on your house. They'll look at exterior, they'll look at construction, paint, uh, gaps in windows. Hopefully, there's none. But they'll look at all those kind of things: guttering, roofing, etc. They'll look at trees. They'll look at the appearance of the neighborhood. They'll take in the whole picture: what's around you, what's behind you. They'll look at interior design and construction. They won't necessarily care that it's done in marble or coriander or whatever, but they're going to look at, is it level? Are there any cracks in the foundation? Are there any cracks in the outside brick? Um, is it sitting on a hill? Is it slanting? And they look at all those things. So they really do try to find anything that might need repaired. Now they could present a repair list that needs to be taken care of, and that's where you get into your condition bargaining back and forth. For closing, you need to pay for this, or I need to pay for this, take it off the top, or something like that. If there's a lot of things to be repaired, 9 times out of 10, if they present what needs to be repaired, the homeowner will take care of that before you close. But sometimes the homeowner doesn't. They just, I don't want to do it. It's up to you, and they'll take it off the purchase price or something. So just know that that'll take care of that. So how do you determine the price of the property? Well, again, you can look at the apps online that'll give you how much property is going for in your neighborhood. Zillow's a real good one to do that. Um, your real estate agent, if you have one, may be able to tell you what that is. You may be able to also find, usually if you Google what the average price per square foot houses are selling for, and you can kind of see what that is. And then you want to look at how long houses that this house has been on the market. It may make a difference in they may have come down in the price, or they may need to come down the price. And so, those kind of things can all enter into it. So then after you know what you're going to buy, you found the house you want, you can negotiate the price. Typically, most people are expecting a counter offer. Now, if you have watched HGTV, a lot of times they go in and try to lowball, trying to get the deal of the century. I can tell you that works sometimes, but I can tell you that doesn't work a lot of the time. House sellers, a lot of times, are just like, you insult them, they're done. So if it's a house you really want, don't do that. If it's a house you just want to lowball to see how you do, go ahead. But if you insult them, they can always say, no, I'm not accepting it, and now we'll accept no other offers from this person. So you want to be leery of that. You want to go in with a decent offer, but of course you want to be less than what they have. And especially if you can eyeball some things that need to be done, or it needs to be painted, or, it's been on the market of 60 days or a year or whatever. Those kind of things can do it, so that can help with your counter offer. They will probably come back to you with the counter offer, so then that's when you can decide if that's what you want to pay for the house or not. What if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market? Seller's market means they can ask any price they want pretty much, and it's selling. If it's a buyer's market, that means houses that are selling, they're selling right away. So it was like we had a buyer's market not too long ago, and it kind of works together as a seller's market too, because the sellers can put it on the market and it sells right away. So it kind of works together in those things for sure. The who is the buyer, the seller, and which market it is has usually to do with the prices and who's getting the better prices. Are sellers getting a higher price from their home than it's probably really worth? Then they consider that a seller's market. Are buyers buying a house for less than it's worth? Then it's a buyer's market. So that's where that comes into play. Earnest money, sometimes they may ask you, or you can offer to put down earnest money. That means, I am serious about this house. I am serious about wanting to make an offer. Here's some earnest money to hold it till I can get everything put together, especially if you haven't done pre-financing, etc. Sometimes people put down earnest money and the checks aren't good. So if you're offered earnest money, be sure you call the bank and make sure that check is good before anything is transactioned. We had a house buyer when I was a kid, when we were moving. And the person made an offer on the house and gave earnest money, and my dad called the bank because he was a finance person, and they said the money's not there. Now, it didn't mean that the money wouldn't be there when the check ran through, but Dad was like, well, if the money's not there, I'm not accepting his check. Hence, where using a cashier's check would come into play, because then the money's there. So that's where that comes into play. You might want to get a cashier's check for your earnest money kind of thing. But anyway, and the real estate agent was very insulted that Dad had done that. You should know that people are good for their money. Dad goes, no, if they don't have it in the bank, they don't have it in the bank, period. I don't care who they are. So you want to be sure of that. You can offer to put down earnest money, but be sure the money's there too. So you want to be sure of that. It's a good faith thing. I really want this home. Please hold it so I get everything together. I'm serious about wanting to buy it, kind of thing. Then there's, as we talked about, when they do the inspection, they may find things that are wrong or things that need to be repaired. Those would come under what they call a contingency clause, which means that these things need to be fixed, or I will buy it, or I will fix these things when I buy it, that kind of thing. Also, contingency clause can apply to, I need to sell my house before I can buy your house. And some people will accept that they know their house will be sold. They know you just have to sell yours first. So technically their house is off the market. Somebody else can't sweep in and get it, but it's being held for you until your house sells. Now there may be a waiting period of 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or something like that, but it's basically saying I'll buy your house as soon as mine sells. So that would be a good contingency clause to include in that. So, of course, transacting, buying a house or selling a house, whichever side you're on, are a legal binding agreement, which means they have things that matter. They have the names and addresses of the buyer and seller on the contract. They have a legal description of the property. They have the price of the property. They have the amount of the mortgage, the interest rate, the approval date, the amount of earnest money if you put something down, or how much you paid in a down payment, the date and time of the closing, where the closing will take place, and if there's an extension, a reason to extend it, i.e., there were some things to be fixed and they're not fixed yet, or you needed to sell your house and it hadn't sold yet. Those things will be listed in that also. Um, there's a contract, of course, between you and the seller. If you're the buyer or the seller, there's a contract between the buyer and the seller. That's probably easier. It means it's going to have a provision for how money is deposited if something goes wrong. So, like if you've put down a down payment, your financing falls through, what happens to the down payment? You've put down earnest money, it falls through, what happens to the earnest money? So that needs to be spelled out because it's a legal contract. Where is that going to go? Does that get refunded or do they keep it? You want to be sure of that, of course, if they're keeping it. There may be adjustments that are made at closing. This didn't get fixed, but we'll take it off the top. We got this fixed, so we're adding it to the top. I mean, those kind of things you want to be sure you're up to date on all that. Deals of what's included in the sale. Did they include appliances, drapes, backyard furniture, inside furniture, carpeting, etc.? Those things will all be on there disclosed. Typically, they tell you if you're going to sell a house and you don't want certain things to what they call convey, um, you need to put that in the description. Like appliances don't convey. I'm taking my appliances with me. Or everything is staying except my refrigerator. It's going out the door with me kind of thing. They also say things that are like attached to the house. Or like if you don't want the curtains to convey, you don't want those to go with the house. You need to say maybe take all the curtains down. Because if the buyer sees those things, a lot of times they'll expect them to be there. If not, specifically state in your description of the house when they're looking, these things don't go with the house because they need to know that. That saves a lot of bickering back and forth. If there's any special conditions on the sale, like again, you had to sell your property to do that, or this has to close in 30 days, or anything like that, are going to be spelled out in that too. Um, the buyer can make inspections before the closing. So if you want to make sure that those things were done that they promised you and done to code, you can always send in somebody to make those checks and changes and make sure that that's done. And then any easements. A lot of time there's utility easements that you may or may not know about. That should be discussed. That's described in the property. There may be easements that they've made with their neighbors on putting a fence in. Sure, you can put your fence on my property, but my property line actually goes over to your property. That might need to be known, especially if there's a tree or something on that. Who's liable for what? So you want to make sure any easements are noted on there. And of course, utility lines, poles, those things are big. Yeah, I mean, poles you can see. A lot of now utility lines are buried, so you want to be sure you know where those easements are too, because that means they can come in and dig up your backyard along those easements because the utility lines are there. So those kind of things are important to know. Of course, you have to obtain financing. You need to have the down payment. Sometimes you can use personal savings. Sometimes you use pension funds. Sometimes there's a tax break on that, and or an allowed withdrawal for purchase of your primary residence. You may have to sell investments. You may need help from relatives to give you a loan or donate cash. Of course, there's private mortgage insurance that's required if less than 20% is put on a down payment. So again, why you want to make sure you've got enough money for a down payment. So, because the insurance, of course, is an added expense. So you want to be sure of that. Um, the mortgage is long term. The shortest they can, well, typically they're 15 and 30 year. Now, the book says that there are 10 year, 50, and 20 year, and 25 year. Those are kind of harder to find. You can find them, but typically you're looking at 15 and 30 year. So, 15-year mortgage, your payments are higher, but you pay it off quicker. 30-year mortgage, your payments are lower, but of course you pay it off longer. Um, Check banks, check savings and loans, check credit unions, check mortgage companies. Find who's got the best mortgage rate for you and who's got the best payments and who's got the least closing costs. Like a mortgage company is probably factoring in all their closing costs into whatever they're quoting you, whereas a bank may not be because they have to staff everybody to do that. So those things you want to be sure of what you're doing. Mortgage brokers can help you get financing. Your home is considered your collateral, so you don't have to have collateral for your $400,000 home. Your home is the collateral, so that takes care of that. And then they're going to look at your income, of course, to approve the loan and mortgage, your credit history, your credit score, your credit rating, your down payment amount, how much you can put down, how long you've been on the job that you have. Is it a stable job and a stable industry? What your assets are? Do you have any other mortgages? What are the current mortgage rates? And then, of course, what the length of the loan is you're looking at. So all those things factor into that. So just keep in mind, they're going to be looking, it's like a annual exam with a doctor. They're going to check everything. So you just want to be sure you have everything in line. Typically, banks look at a debt to income ratio looking for those kind of things. And what that means, of course, it's a calculation because we're a finance class. But what that means is looking at the anticipated monthly mortgage payment compared to your gross income. So if the monthly mortgage payment is let's see if I can do that. I don't think I can. Yeah. So they're looking to look at your mortgage payment. So if your salary is $60,000 divided by 12, you've got 52% that they're saying can be your mortgage payment. That's how much of your mortgage payment you can look at for that. A back end ratio is going to look in, that's a front end ratio, how they calculate. A back end ratio is calculated by adding up all your debt payments and dividing that amount by the total debt payments and gross income. So they're looking at a bigger picture with that back end ratio because they're looking at all your debts and not just getting how much you can afford when you walk in the door. Pre-qualification we talked about is very important. They're going to also do your credit report and do those kind of things, and that lets you know exactly how much you can get. That's becomes quote unquote binding for 30 days, and interest they may lock in for you for looking at that and pre-approving for about 30 to 90 days. So that gives you, if interest rates are going up, that kind of gives you a nice window to be able to look and hold that interest rate that you know you're approved for. So first, just to determine what your monthly income is if you're looking at it. So you've got 60,000 divided by 12. Then if you're going to use a down payment, it needs to be a down payment of at least 5%, and then sorry, stuttering around. And then the lenders are going to use 33% of monthly gross income for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So that's what they're thinking it's good, they can look at instead of that 25% or 20% of just the payment. They're looking at the payment plus taxes plus insurance and interest. And by doing that, they get a number, 1,900 on one and 1,650 with the other, looking at additional debt, looking at all the additional debt. Then subtract the debt payments so you can kind of figure out where you're at. And then that you're left with how much your mortgage payment can be. So they're taking your income divided by 12. They're taking off how much they're calculating the monthly payment to be, or how much they're calculating the mortgage to be, and then taking that off. That means you could afford under the front end method, and looking at with additional debt of $1,120 a month. If you don't add on the additional debt because they're not taking in credit cards and etc., you could do $1,350 a month. Again, you need to know which you're looking at because $1,350 sounds great, but if you have debt that adds up to that difference of $200 something that you're making payments on, you need to go with the $1,120. So again, know that it may be better to look at the whole debt thing. Then take that amount divided by 12 to get your monthly amount. Then it tells you that you can afford. Then oh no, then I'm sorry, not divide by, but multiply by. So then looking at that, you could get a mortgage with that monthly payment of 1,125, about 177,000, or with example B, 213,000. So that lets you know where you can go. Then if you divide your a mortgage amount by one to kind of get a fractional purpose for your down payment, and take the down payment off the top because you know 177 is what you're gonna finance. You could look at a house that's 196. So the difference with that would be your down payment. The same thing on the option B with no additional debt. You're looking at 213,000 as your net house, but you're looking for a house that's actually 237 because you're going to have that down payment. Points. You may hear somebody say, I paid points at closing. Not all loans require points. Points are something that you can pay, basically additional amounts of cash towards reducing your interest rate. So that means you've got some extra cash around. You can pay about 1% of a loan amount will lower the interest rate by about 1%, maybe. So you want to make sure. But you can pay extra cash in to reduce your interest rate a lot of times. So and that's what they call doing points. Things that you need to consider if you're doing that. Are you going to live in the same home for over 5 years, or do you plan to sell in the next few years? Paying points may not be advantageous if you're going to sell it in a few years, just because that's a lot of cash out of your pocket. And so it may not be something that you want to do. And the reason we talk about mortgage rate, interest rates, um, basically, if you want to divide out how you're paying, if you're paying a 4% rate in 3 years, you paid about 4.77 in interest. In a 30, that's a 30-year, sorry. In a 15-year rate, you'd pay about 7 point. Looking at mortgage payments, I would almost always recommend, excuse me, a fixed rate mortgage, only because then you know your payment's fixed. But that's my philosophy. Some people prefer to have a variable rate mortgage, etc. Um, but what it means is that you're looking at equal payments, except for taxes and interest, which will change it. But your payments on your home are equal for the length of your loan: 10 years, 30 years, 15 years. The loan is considered amortized, which basically means the balance owed is reduced with each payment. So there's interest and principal on each payment. Now, it is one of those front end payments for interest. So the first few years of payments are higher interest, less principal, but you are paying on principal. It's not just interest only. There are government programs out there. If you're a veteran, there's a veteran VA loan that's available. Certain incomes allowed for Federal Housing Authority. They give you lower down payment and lower interest right off the bat. So those are something to consider if you've had some government work or may qualify. You can do an adjustable rate mortgage or an ARM. It doesn't mean it's attached to your body. It just means it's an adjustable rate mortgage, and it'll have a cap, and it'll have the lowest, and basically it can fluctuate between those. Now it doesn't go up daily and etc. They usually set a time frame. It may go up every 6 months or a year. They're not gonna your payment's not gonna change every month, but it can change. And if you're expecting rates to drop dramatically and don't want to have to go quickly, and you're expecting rates to you don't want to have to necessarily refinance, you can always do that to take advantage of the lower rates. Now, if rates are going up, you don't really want to do that because that means your payments are going to go up and your rates are going to go up on your loan. Then when it gets to a rate that you like, you can always lock it and refinance it at that point. You want to be sure that you look at when they assess it. Do they assess it daily? Do they, I mean, they're not going to change it daily, but do they assess it daily and do an average over 6 months? So they just look at January, July 1st and look at those dates. Are there any restrictions on how they change the monthly payment? Look at frequency. Like I said, most of them don't change it monthly. There may be one or two out there loans that do that. So if that's the case, you want to be sure. And then of course, make sure that if there's a negative amortization and what the limits are, etc. So you want to be sure that you're covered with that. You just look at it logically. You can always do an interest-only mortgage. These kind of were outlawed with the last housing crisis that we had, but then the interest only mortgages have kind of wiggled their way back in. So just beware. These aren't the best that are out there, and they might not be legal in federally, and they might not be legal in the state that you're looking at. So just be sure. But basically, what it's doing is allowing interest only. So it gets you your foot in the door for a larger home, but you're only paying interest for the first few years. But then you are going to have to pay principal, and when you have to pay principal, that payment's going to go up. The premise behind them was to help people get their foot in the door, get their bills paid off, get a home quicker, and then be able to start payments in a couple of years with principal and carry it out for the life of the loan. The problem was people didn't follow that rule. They had interest only payments. They got used to paying that payment on their mortgage, were living not paycheck to paycheck, but close, and using that as their thing. So then when the payments went up, they couldn't afford anything that they were doing. So just beware, buyer beware for sure. Other finance methods, every once in a while, if you've got something, you can look at a balloon payment. If you've got, you know, a trust that's going to pay out to you $500,000 when you turn 30, you might look at a balloon payment mortgage. So you just pay the bare minimum now, and then when you turn 30 and your trust pays you the money, you can pay the house off. They usually are a shorter term loan, 5 to 7 years. They may go to 10 at the very most. And that payment is due in full at the end. So you want to be sure that whatever you've got coming in, that cash cow that's coming in, is going to come. Typically, a new mortgage has to be, it's done just as we've said, 15 or 30 years, you make the payments, interest principal, interest first, etc. So you just want to keep up with that. There are interest rate subsidies. Some home builders or real estate developers reduce the mortgage for the first few years to kind of help you get your foot in the door. Home prices often increase to cover the buy down. So just be sure if you've got a deal like that you understand how it's going to work. Second mortgages are very rarely used to purchase a primary home, but they can be used to refurbish your home, buy buy appliances, whatever you need to do for the thing. And doing that is known as a home equity loan. So you're using the equity in your home. Again, we talked about that would be if you have a $400,000 home, you paid $100,000 down, and your house is worth $500,000 now. You've got about a $200,000 equity in that home. Now they won't loan you the full $200,000 because they want to have a little wiggle room in case prices fall or something on the values of homes. But it lets you know that you've got some equity in there that you could borrow from the house, get the same tax breaks that you do on a mortgage, and then get those things financed or get those things refurbished in your house, or addition made to your house or whatever you wanted to do, and have it still fall into your home loan. Reverse mortgages. You hear about those on TV, especially late night TV. I don't really like those, but that's just me. But for some people, it's a really nice way to go. If somebody is 62 years or older, they own their home or have a majority of their home paid off, they'll do what they call an equity conversion mortgage or reverse mortgage. And what they do is they pay you a monthly payment. They own your house, and when you pass away, nobody owns your house. I mean, whoever bought your house has bought your house. So no longer is that house an asset. That works out well for some families. They prefer that. Most families are shocked that that their parents did that and they don't own that house and that they don't have that asset to sell and or get rid of. So just beware of that. If seniors are needing money and that's how they're dipping into it, maybe see if you can find another way for them to get money, home equity loan, something like that wouldn't necessarily transfer the whole house to someone else as a third party. Again, look at refinancing. Refinancing, as I said, rule of thumb used to be if the interest rate dropped 2 points, it was worth refinancing. Now the rule of thumb is if it drops 1% below your interest rate, it can make a big difference in what your fee is. So, and how much you're paying in interest, of course. So if you're paying 5% interest and all of a sudden you're paying 4%, you could even look at keeping your house payments the same, but you're going to be paying more to principal now and less to interest. So those things are real important when you're trying to get it paid off. When you get ready to close on your house, there's going to be a walkthrough to inspect the home and condition, make sure it hasn't changed in that 30, 60, 90 days it's taking you to get the paperwork together and close. Meet the buyer seller lender all get together and sign all the documents. Sometimes now you'll find the buyer, especially if they're moving or leaving town, um, have come into town and signed everything the day that they're moving. You may find that the seller has signed their part before you did yours, so it may not be all in one room. It used to be all in one room, everybody had to be there, but now sometimes those things are handled separately, and each one shows up and does it. Closing costs. Just because you paid all that stuff up front, you have to make sure you're ready to pay at closing. There's going to be a title insurance and title search fee. There's an appraisal fee. There may be an attorney's fee. There's a survey. There's a termite inspection, recording fees, transfer taxes, warranty deed, lender's origination fee, and there's probably an escrow for tax and insurance reserve. There may be prepaid interest, and sometimes there's a real estate commission paid by either buyer, seller, or split. So you want to make sure you've got that covered too. So it can be kind of costly. Um, this just gives you a breakdown of how much those could be. Some are a percent, some are a dollar. So it just lets you know what the buyer may be paying to close, what the seller's probably paying to close, and this kind of gives you that idea of that you're going to have a lot there to close. You're going to have a lot of cash to close, and you may wiggle some of these things over to the seller. Probably loan origination fee you couldn't. Wire transfer fee you wouldn't have if you didn't have to worry about that. Lender's origination fee, they couldn't pay that either, but you may have to, they're looking at splitting the attorney's fees, maybe make them pay more. Title insurance, maybe have them pay a bigger part of it. Um, Make sure your mortgage, also your car payment, anything you think you might want to pay off early doesn't have a penalty for paying it off early. That's usually not found now as much as it was at one time, but at one time that was a big deal because banks banked on you keeping that loan for 30 years, and they were making their investment decisions based on the fact that they had that money coming in for 30 years. So if you paid it off early, that ticked them off, so they charged you a penalty. So now you want to be sure that kind of got waived because that was considered a deceptive practice. So you want to be sure that that's not on there, but most don't include that now. But make sure, because if you want to pay it off early, you want to be able to pay it off early. Of course, you may lose tax deductions if you pay it off early because you don't have the real estate tax. You'll still have real estate taxes, but you won't have the mortgage interest to deduct. Paying additional amounts on your mortgage. Be sure you pay off your credit card and other high interest debt first before you start paying that. And then be aware of anything that promises to set up a extra payment for you. Make sure they really are doing that, and make sure they're not charging a fee. Sometimes there's somebody say, "Oh, sign up with us and we'll pay extra on your mortgage, and you won't even hardly feel it." Well, you will, because they're charging you a fee and etc. So just be sure you can do that yourself if you want to do it. So now that you bought your home, you've lived in it, you may want to sell your home, or you may want to downsize, or a job may change. So what do we have to do for selling our home? So since you want to sell your home, there's a strategy for that. So preparing your home, paint, repair, clean. You may want to call in an inspector and have him look at your house before you go through the inspection for selling and closing and etc. Just to see, what do they see that needs to be done. Do they see a floor that needs repaired? Do you need to update this, update that? That kind of thing. They can let you know. Clear your garage. That's usually our big accumulation place for stuff. So clear it out. Keep the lawn cut. Don't make it look like it's, falling into disarray or becoming repossessed. Becoming possessed. Could be becoming possessed too, but being repossessed. Keep your kitchens and bathroom clean. When you show the home, turn on the lights, open the drapes, let them see the windows. And lamps and lights always make a home look homier, and so that gives it a warm, lived-in feeling. Of course, anything you've done energy saving, water saving, be sure you list that in your thing. Everything's been upgraded, new AC, those kind of things you want to list. You may want to hire somebody to come in and stage your home. We've had neighbors in the past that, basically had a new home, moved their stuff to it, then put their home on the market. So that they could take time moving their stuff and going through their stuff and purging and all that kind of stuff. Then when they put their home on the market, of course, they moved all the furniture. So they hire stagers to come in and put furniture different places, rugs, lamps, and set up the rooms as you want. They always say to, show the potential. If you've reclaimed a bedroom and made it an office, that's fine. Everybody understands that. But if you've reclaimed a bedroom as a workout room, you might put a bed in there so it looks like it is a bedroom and show that it is a bedroom. There's just staging tricks, and you can read about it. You can research on the internet of things to do, but you can also hire a stager to come in with your stuff. And they'll usually purge. They always tell you to purge personal stuff, take down personal photos, those kind of things. Clear tops and walls and stuff so that people can envision their stuff in there. That's the bottom line, is you want them to walk in and see how they could make it their home, and that makes it easier to sell. So you also have to determine a selling price. Again, like you looked at buying, check out what other things are going for in your neighborhood. Check out the price per square foot of homes in your area. If you've done improvements, factor those in. You can research. Some improvements really don't add to the value of the house, but some improvements do. Some choose to sell it as is if you don't want to do the improvements. So that may be a little off the top to do that if you don't want to get into remodeling your kitchen or bathroom. You can do sale by owner, and then use an attorney or a title company to help with the contracts and closing. That's perfectly fine. Or you can list it with a real estate agent. They'll take care of negotiations and services that we talked about earlier. If you list it with a real estate agent starting in 2024, home sellers are no longer required to pay their own agent and the buyer's agent. That was a lot of things that happen in closing, is they sit there and go, well, you sold the house, so you pay my agent and your agent. Because typically it's a different, you each have your own agents that are working. Listing agents no longer have to specify how much the buyer's agent will be paid, and then fee will be negotiated separately between the buyer and the buyer's agent. So, those things are new with real estate agents, so you want to be sure you're up to snuff on all that if you're using one. Okay, that's all for buying a house. I'm sure it was overwhelming, daunting, boring, and unbelievably long, but you now are well equipped and ready to tackle buying a home. And even if it's in your future, you'll at least know you can come back to and find all the things you need to be looking for when you do that. Thank you.